issue for so long that it's very, very unique now that teachers are starting to take a position on this. We believe that it'll be ones and twos at first, but we aim to get all of the teachers on board with this. So,
right on.
Joining up for the anti-gun people, because that's like a whole group that's mobilizing right now. It seems, or
reach out to them and bring them in.
it's like.
You know, I just wanted to say, I don't know if you all have looked online or not to see the state of the air along the Front Range. It's already compromised. They had a benzene leak up north that got detected over at Boulder County.
That's leukemia.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's already compromised all along the Front Range from this stuff. We're not starting at zero, it's already compromised.
You can go on the Boulder County Health Department website and see the levels of all of the carcinogens that are coming out of these wells. They're posted every single day.
Yeah.
And it's all broken down into each chemical.
Yeah, it's hanging right through the Front Range here because of the way the air is.
Where do they post that information?
Boulder County Health Department.
Oh.
The monitoring is done by a group called INSTALL. I don't know what the acronym is, but it's part of CU's altitude and atmosphere.
Could I request that anyone in the audience speaking, when they're speaking, they stand up so that they can be heard?
I don't want to lose my seat.
Oh, yeah. I should say, for one thing, we're
There's tons of people. INSTALL is the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research.
Yeah.
We're on Facebook Live right now as well, everybody. So say hi to the interwebs.
Great.
I just wanted to pick up on something that Mark Williams had said, which was about the half-mile setbacks. It's not, I know it's not enough and it's not a ban, but it is one thing that is statewide, and it includes playgrounds, open space, and any source of drinking water. So if you map that out, you don't have a spot in Lafayette. The other thing about that is there are a heck of a lot of people in communities a lot more conservative than Lafayette who might not have people fighting fracking and understanding what's going on with their health, and this will protect many, many people beyond our borders. So it's a statewide petition that should be coming out soon, and people are looking. ColoradoRising.org, CORising.org is looking for petition carriers as well as signers. So you can sign up online to be trained to carry the petition.
And if anyone here has not signed up on East Boulder County United's mailing list, I'll pass this around. It'll give you a way to get information on what's going on, different dates like Cliff was talking about. So I'll just send this going and try to get it back to me at the end of the meeting. If you sign your name again and you're already on the list, we'll figure it out and move on to the meeting. Thank you.
This is a lost opportunity. You guys don't get it kind of the whole way.
I just cut the mic off just to say battery for a minute.
I'm not even using it right now.
Okay.
I'll use it when they get up there and start talking.
Okay, but keep an ear on it, because like if that bat does die, then I could switch it out maybe. Shouldn't, you know, but you never know with these things.
Think about this just in terms of Twitter.
And hot.
Yeah?
Fire. Mm-hmm.
It hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about that. Who looks more friendly? I'm just like worried. Like, you can come back.
Really, right by the school? Here's the map. How do I find? There's the school.
You looking for their future plans?
Yeah. I'm just on the. It's like where I'm guessing.
Size of the gross reservoir. They want to increase the height of the dam by half again as high as it already is. It would flood, drown out over 600,000 trees. It would make all of the water downstream from the dam. It would be dead. There would be no fish living in it. So it's the expansion of the gross dam is being proposed by Denver Water.
Stop corporate rule.
But it's in corporate rule.
Stop corporate rule. Stop corporate rule. Stop corporate rule.
The dam is in Boulder County, so you can write to the Boulder County Commissioners to oppose the expansion of the dam. Denver Water thinks it's a done deal, but it is not a done deal yet. So please inform yourselves and take action, because we will all suffer their consequences. So.
And it's intimately related to this issue because it wants to bring more population and more oil and gas and more exposure for health contaminants. Stop corporate rule! Stop corporate rule! Stop corporate rule! Stop corporate rule! Stop corporate rule!
So they'll have.
I was trying to find the map.
The COGCC will have maps of sites, the poor sites. So you'll see like the pad here, or the drill site. They had one up on ABC.
That's happened before, you know.
I can't seem to find a map anyway.
Cliff wanders back over here.
Pass me that green bag.
Probably as long as they possibly can.
I've been in there since about 6:35. Almost an hour.
So, is it recording? But it's nothing that you did. It's something that's happening around you.
Sound very good.
I think you probably know.
Does that have to do with
She came in here. She went to you, and then she did today's work. In the morning, went to yoga, and then did the workout calendar, whatever it was. I don't know. She's got so much energy. There's no way I could work out. I mean, I guess I could work out 3 times in one day what I want. I don't know if I want to. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. No way. I had in the morning. It was okay, but I don't want to do anything. Because what if you like drop down your head?
I can't have 1 year.
No. I'm gonna have to go as soon as my birthday today. My wife's making it. Because we got cake and all that. So, yeah. I'm like, I gotta go and see what's going on here. Because I'm usually out of time, so I can't go.
It's killing me.
It'll be really interesting to see how they react. So are they going to have one person spinning in the city, or?
So it's like choreographed.
What?
Kind of choreographed.
They have some ideas. Everybody's shooting with me, so I'm there tomorrow. So you think muscle ups are going to be 18.3?
I don't know about 18.3, but they're going to be in there somewhere.
Our overhead squats are going to be up. Yes. Was it last year where people were blowing out biceps and tearing their chest from all the muscle ups?
It was at
I would think they would change. They would. Because when you're super fatigued and you got those rings behind your ear, you're just going to tear something.
well, it's more. Evan and I were talking about this. They're off. That's where you get like 10 and 12. We're like,
Oh, because you're like super muscle
All that fun enough to everything you can do and then I came here.
right.
I thought like, oh, whatever.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't necessarily the movement, it was the preparation.
Yeah, like the next person off, and it's like about 30, and like I couldn't understand what they were saying. A long time, yeah, and then there was like a lot of just like heroes.
So
I was like the only
guy in the vest, not on your right.
White man tells me what to do. So yeah, it was just like really crazy. But so then I was like, just like calibrating. I was like, where is like the hippie class? And my sister lives like 3 hours away from here. West,
Hey folks, real quick, just in case you're wondering, because I've had a bunch of folks ask me about this, the library is city property, and so we are going to be meeting. Can you hear me now? Yeah. All right. We're going to be meeting. This meeting is going to carry all the way through. We don't have to close the library. All right. Yeah. So some folks are worried that it closes at 8 o'clock. And we've only got a half an hour to discuss matters that are life, death, important to Lafayette. That's not the case. All right. So we'll stay here until it's resolved, one way or another.
I thought the city council was going to come back in here at 7. That's what they said.
Yeah, we don't know what's going on. For those of you that don't know, there's been a lot of vacillation around this meeting. Mayor Berg originally wanted all of this to be an executive session. If you don't know what executive session means, that means we would have never known what was said or taken place in that meeting. Yeah. The public overruled that motion, so we got our town hall here. For a while, it was going to be city staff that was going to facilitate the meeting, that are both unelected, and neither one of them lives in Lafayette. And they're back!
Can you test this? So I want to.
Hello. We're waiting for the mayor.
We are.
What did we miss?
We solved it all.
I can be anywhere.
Community rights are human rights.
Community rights are human rights. Community rights are human rights. Community rights are human rights.
Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. We want to have a good conversation on this vacancy. Lafayette Mayor Christine Burke, thank you for joining us this evening. We
I
are,
can't hear you.
oh,
Turn it
that
up.
is never a problem I hear from my husband. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We are here this evening specifically as a community to ask questions of Mr. Lindsay on this sort of, legal arguments surrounding the city of Lafayette and the Climate Bill of Rights. So I'm going to have a couple of ground rules. I want it to be very respectful. I want everyone to be able to be heard. We're going to get to everyone's questions, and please, just as a community, I want to make sure everyone feels respected in the room. So that's the ground rules. Those are pretty easy. And I'm gonna, gently nudge folks to ask a question, because this is really an opportunity not to talk about sort of stuff we've heard in council meetings before, whether you're for or against. I really want you to take this opportunity to ask the specific legal questions of Mr. Lindsay pertaining to Lafayette, right? So this is a very short period of time that we have, so let's use it wisely, okay?
And can I just say, everyone in this room does not feel respected.
Okay.
That's the baseline that we're starting at.
Well, I think we should feel that we can all be safe and have whatever questions we may wish to ask. So if any time someone doesn't feel respected, let me know. And
because they're going to drill oil and gas in the community.
part of this is us not having the sort of back and forth. It's really between the community and Mr. Lindsay. Signs are fine. I'm fine with signs. Please, again, the applause. This is, again, not an opportunity for people to just have dialogues. It's really a question and answer session.
Good.
So let's be respectful of that. I do hold the right to adjourn the meeting if I feel like those rules are... Because we have our time here, and it's finite. So I want to make sure we take advantage of it. Can we all agree to do that? Yes. Okay, wonderful. I have one little segment I need to read just from our executive session, then we'll get started. And I'll just, we have a microphone here for folks to ask questions. I want as many people to ask questions, so I'll sort of be directing folks. Feel free to come up as well. I don't want a line that snakes all the way to the back of the room, so let's just come up a few at a time, and I'm going to select folks as well. And then I also have questions that have been previously submitted to the city, so I'm going to be, throughout the evening, sort of peppering those questions in as well to make sure we get to those. And there might be some similarities in questions, so there might thematically be some things that I'll redirect and ask some questions that we've received prior from other citizens who potentially couldn't be here tonight. Okay? So that's my list here. And we'll get started. Can I just have a handful of folks that want to come up and start asking questions? And I'm going to, do you have a question? He's going to do, sorry, thank you. So he's going to do a quick overview for us, and then we'll start with the Q&A and the questions that we received from the city. Okay? All right. Oh, yeah, thank you. The time is now, what time is it? 7:39 p.m. The executive session has been concluded. The participants in the executive session were myself, Mr. Lindsay, the entirety of council, Mr. Williamson, and Mr. Kopacki. If any person who participated in the executive session believes that any substantial discussion of any matters not included in the motion to go into the executive session occurred during the executive session, or that any improper action occurred during the executive session in violation of the open meetings law, I ask that you state your concerns now. Okay? Thank you, council. We'll proceed with Mr. Lindsay's presentation.
It's like when you're getting married. Does anybody have an objection? So instead of giving 20-minute talk, I'm not going to, because we're running late. So I'd like to talk for about 5 minutes and then take questions. So I flew in last night into Denver, a wonderful airport that you have, through 55-mile-an-hour winds. And so as the plane was going up and down, losing and gaining altitude, I had an opportunity to reminisce about the early days of our work as a law firm. And part of that was about how naive we were way back when, in 1995, when the Community of Environmental Law, the Legal Defense Fund, was created, so CELDF, the firm for which I work. And we were naive because we thought that existing environmental laws would actually solve things at the community level. And so for about 10 years, and people may know the story, so I'm not going to go into detail, but for about 10 years we did conventional environmental legal work. We brought lawsuits to enforce the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act and all the environmental laws that we have in the United States, which are so good that lawyers for the United States government actually export those models out to other countries and help them put together the same kinds of environmental laws in those countries. And by and large, we had an epiphany of sorts, but it took us about 10 years to get there, which was that, in essence, the environmental laws as they operate in the United States were not about saying no to anything. They were actually about helping to make corporate projects coming into communities a little less harmful. And so, coming out of law school, we thought, hey, these are the environmental laws, and if we just had enough people enforcing them and enough communities willing to enforce them, everything would be okay. But after those 10 years, we came to the conclusion that the environmental laws really weren't worth the paper that they were written on in many ways. And my favorite environmental law is the National Environmental Policy Act, because everybody always used to talk about these environmental impact statements. Oh, this project's going to go in, but they have to do an environmental impact statement to delineate what kind of impacts there are going to be on the environment. And we were like, oh, that's great. Let's force them to do an EIS. If they don't do one, let's sue them, force them to do one. What people don't know, for the most part, is that environmental impact statements, there's no requirement that you choose the least environmentally damaging alternative after you do the report. You put the report together, you say, wow, this is really bad. This project's going to have a lot of bad impacts. But the document and the study doesn't prevent the agency from moving forward with the project anyway. It's a study. And as long as they say what the bad things are, they can move forward with it anyway. It's not stopping shit. I mean, literally, it's not stopping anything. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, same stuff, permitting, zoning, hearing board appeals, we've been in them all, looking for over a decade, trying to find ways that communities, when they knew something was harmful, could actually stop it from coming in. That's it. It seems so simple to us for those 10 years. We were looking for something that would allow a community where a majority of people knew that the thing was going to harm them coming in, would allow them to say no to the thing coming in. But the law's not set up to do that. It's not set up to do that. And in fact, it doesn't even see you as people living in a local municipality. The U.S. constitutional system, the structure of law itself, sees the federal government, sees the state government. It doesn't see you. You're a creature of the state. You're a municipality. The state can abolish you tomorrow, can abolish the city of Lafayette tomorrow. And they don't see you living in the municipality. You don't exist. Who does exist? Corporations exist. And not only do corporations exist, but corporations have the highest constitutional powers in the United States. So here you have you, way down here, not even seen in the courts, just a creature, an artificial figment that's created by the state to help it carry out various matters, which is how the state treats you. And here are corporations way up here, with the highest rights that can be bestowed by the U.S. constitutional structure in the United States. Guess who wins? Right? You got the ant, you got the bulldozer. It's no surprise as to who wins. And 99.99% of the time, that's exactly what happens, is the corporation rolls over the community, and eventually the things that we were trying to stop for 10 years go in. The factory farms, the frack wastewater injection wells, the fracking, the frack jobs, the other oil and gas extraction, the industrial water withdrawals, the industrial wind turbines that knock whole mountaintops off in New Hampshire, mountaintop removal mining in West Virginia. They don't get stopped. I mean, it's just because the law is not on your side. The law is not on your side. It's not there. It doesn't exist. And what does that mean? You have to make it.
The library will be closing in 2 minutes.
It's good timing. Your democracy will be closing in 5 minutes. Gracias. So what does that mean? We're covering a lot of stuff here pretty quickly, but I've been here before, and I think people know, coming to grips with what you're faced with here. The fact is, when we say you have to make the law, what does that mean? Well, it means you have to travel the course that other movements have traveled. And we've had very few movements in the United States, because very rarely have we gotten our shit together enough to have a movement in the United States. People talk about the suffragist movement and think it happened in 1890 to 1920. Well, the first organized suffragist gathering was 100 years before women obtained the right to vote. And the abolitionist movement took 110 years from the first organized Quaker groups coming together to talk about abolition of slavery. This stuff takes time. And the abolitionists and suffragists were also on the outside looking in. The U.S. constitutional structure didn't recognize women as persons. The U.S. Constitution didn't recognize African Americans as persons. And people may be saying right now, what does that have to do with us, right? Because we're dealing with fracking, oil and gas extraction. These guys were dealing with fundamental human civil rights. Well, they were on the outside looking in, and you are too. Because you don't have those protections of the U.S. constitutional system. The system bestows it on the oil and gas corporations that are trying to come in. That's how the structure is set up. If you don't believe me, there's some reading I can send you and look at it that way. But the abolitionists and the suffragists had to build a movement from scratch. And they had to drive themselves into the U.S. Constitution. They had to change the constitutional structure. That's what they had to do. Here in the United States, we're at the beginning of what I think is a probably 40 to 50-year struggle, in all honesty, to a struggle that community by community, state by state, actually drives itself up to change the very structure of how the constitutional process works in the United States. What does that mean for you? Well, it means that the city of Lafayette has to decide whether you're going to fight or not. If you're going to fight or you're going to go the course that other municipalities have gone when faced with oil and gas extraction, which is to try to regulate it. And when you try to regulate an activity, you validate it. You legalize it. You legitimize it. That's what you do. That's what it is. That's what zoning and other environmental regulations are. The law says you can't say no, and so you move in the direction that you can, that you're allowed to move under the system. And that means validating and, in some ways, legalizing the activity within your community. So you have to decide whether to fight or whether to not fight. And fighting is hard. If you did an interview with Susan B. Anthony back in the 1870s, 1880s, she'd say the same thing. It's hard. And it sucks because it's on your shoulders. And Lafayette's not alone. Last month I was in Ohio. There's 20 communities there now working on fracking and oil and gas issues to say no to those things in the community. It's also very complex. You're facing a series of legal doctrines that have been developed over the past 200 years. Whether those are corporate constitutional rights, where corporations have the same rights as persons and therefore are elevated above your rights in the community to decide what happens there. Whether it's preemption, which your courts have already spoken out extensively on, that the state preempts you in most issues of oil and gas extraction, including especially bans on oil and gas extraction. And something called Dillon's Rule, where your municipality is completely subordinate to the state itself. That unless you're pre-authorized to pass a law at the local level, that you are prohibited from doing so. That's Dillon's Rule. Those are the bones or the skeletons of how the system actually operates. When you dare to say, we don't want oil and gas extraction here, we don't want fracking here, we want to ban that activity here, you run face-to-face into these legal doctrines. Because while a lot of people want to treat this as a corporate problem, it's just a bad company here, a good company here, and they're coming in, and it's a corporate issue. It's not. When you take on the issue, you don't run into the corporation first, you run into your own system of law first. You run into your own system of law first. That's why this isn't as simple as treating it as an oil and gas issue. You don't have an oil and gas problem, you have a democracy problem. Right? That's the base. For that to change, it's going to take a lot, and it's going to take bravery, and it's going to take very courageous people. It's going to take elected officials who decide to go a different path, a different route, to do certain things differently than what municipalities have done in the past. But it's important to understand that you're not alone. Sometimes it feels very isolating, like this is our community and it's the only one doing it. Well, it's not. There are 200 communities now across the United States which have begun to do what's roughly termed as rights-based organizing, which is to say the rights in our community that we hold as human beings and as a broader community are so important that we're going to seize, use, pick your verb, the municipal government to actually become a protector of those rights within the municipality, right? And then to use that status as a protector of rights to actually ban those activities which are harmful to people within the community that violate those rights. So we spend our time somewhat, our staff, not me anymore, I'm getting too old, crisscrossing the United States, meeting with communities like yours, trying to explain to you what the situation is, what you're stuck in. A lot of people decide not to fight. They decide that it's easier just to go home and pretend that it's not happening or try to work on other things. And it's a hugely personal decision to make about what direction you decide to go. But everybody, 10 years ago, people were looking around to figure out who was going to go first. And there were some folks that went first. And now you're not first anymore. You are emerging into a community where other people have gone before you and they have learned important lessons and strategies and tactics and those types of things. And in some ways, we're the holder of those strategies and tactics. But future generations will not be kind to us if we abandon today. If we don't do what we have to today, future generations will not take kindly to us. And my final thought before we take over questions is that people have tended to talk about oil and gas regulation, especially the lawyers. And no offense, because I'm a lawyer, but the lawyers are the problems in many places. It's the lawyer's job to advise about responsibilities and pros and cons and those types of things. But the folks to make the strategic decisions are your elected officials. It's a political decision, not a legal decision, to actually put up a fight. They have to be informed by those legal decisions. That's what good advocates do. That's what good lawyers do. But in the end, when it finally comes down to the end point, it's a political decision that needs to be made about whether to fight something or not. Unfortunately, across the United States, when people have come up against oil and gas extraction, city councils, other important people, staff, have tried to treat oil and gas extraction as just a problem of earthquakes or explosions, or if we just had better setbacks, or all those types of regulatory mechanisms. But the problem is you can't regulate away climate change. That doesn't happen. What you're pulling out of the ground will eventually be combusted. What's eventually combusted is going to accelerate global warming. It's going to accelerate climate change, that which is cooking the planet. And in terms of not being alone, from my hometown of Spokane, folks sat on the tracks last year to stop fossil fuel shipments by train. So I think we're entering an age where being polite is no longer an option. And that things that have not been done before at the municipal level perhaps need to be done. And it's understandable to me that those things are happening and that municipalities especially need to take steps to protect and afford those protections to people that decide to take those steps. I think that's an understandable step to take as well. Thank you.
But this is a good start. So I'm going to go with some questions that have been submitted, and then if folks have questions from the audience, again, please ask questions. Has this legal strategy been tried in court, and if so, has it been successful?
So it's a question that comes up a lot because people want to weigh the pros and cons of going one direction rather than the other. We have been in court many times arguing that a constitutional right of local community self-government exists. It's not recognized by the courts right now, and although it was back in the 1800s with cases that petered out at the end of the 1800s, where courts across the country in 14 different state Supreme Courts recognized a constitutional right of local community self-government, and that right of local community self-government included the right of people within the community to make decisions to govern their own community, to make decisions about what it would look like 30, 40, 50 years in the future. Those doctrines battled it out with another legal doctrine called Dillon's Rule, in which municipalities were seen merely as creations of the state that could be manipulated or abolished by the state as it so chose. Those two doctrines, Cooley Doctrine, which stood for right of local community self-government, and Dillon's Rule did battle, and the U.S. Supreme Court selected a winner, and the winner was Dillon's Rule. And Dillon's rule is named after a railroad lawyer who was Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court. And he's famous for his statement that it's not necessary for the people of a municipality to even elect their officials, that they can be appointed, because there's no point in having them elected by the people of the community in the first place, because they have no independent power apart from the state. So that was Dillon's rule, established by the U.S. Supreme Court. So coming back to the question, we published a law review article last year on this constitutional right of local community self-government. It's what we argue to courts, and courts have not been receptive. Judges have, by and large, dismissed it in a paragraph. Recently, in one case, we filed a 90-page brief. The judge dismissed it in 4 lines. And so the question is always, judges, looking at precedent, deciding something new. We were heartened last year when a judge in Oregon, Judge Ann Aiken, ruled for the first time in the United States that there is a constitutional right to a livable climate. Many people may not know that, but yeah. First time in history that she found an unenumerated constitutional right within the U.S. Constitution, a right to a livable climate, which is what your ordinance is based on. And so that lends some additional weight to our making the argument about a right of local community self-government in addition to that right to a livable climate. But the answer to the question is, in some ways we wouldn't expect judges to embrace a brand new legal doctrine off the bat. But folks need to weigh that as you move into court and decide what to do in terms of a pro or a con.
I have another question here. Is there anything particular about the situation in Lafayette, our Citizen Bill of Rights, some precedent, another case that is applicable, that is able to be leveraged in court, that would help us have a chance of success? What is the likelihood of a positive outcome if the city has to defend this case in court?
So I think there are 2 pieces of that. One of the favorable piece is that Judge Aiken's decision, which means that another court has found that a right to a livable climate exists, which is very important. Having said that, the posture of the case was slightly different. It was enforced against the U.S. government rather than against a private actor. Here you'd be enforcing it against a private actor, so that's another hurdle that's in its path. But it does provide some of that case law. The right of local community self-government, it's about resuscitating this older doctrine to then use it for current circumstances. In terms of success, we usually don't, we don't give odds, but it's challenging. And the fact that prior courts have denied it doesn't lend support to other courts, but we have to understand that this is the way law changes. Law changes by repeated challenge. And if you wait for somebody else to go, somebody else never goes. I mean, that's the way it works.
Hey guys, you've been to my city council chambers, you use your jazz hands. I want to make sure we get as many questions in as we can, okay?
Now on the flip side of that,
Maybe you should have come out sooner then.
on the flip side of that is the fact that there's real danger involved. When we counsel municipal governments who retain us to represent them, we will generally only represent municipalities that go the distance, that don't repeal an ordinance halfway through the litigation or run for the hills when something bad happens in the litigation. And most of that is because we put ourselves on the line. The oil and gas industry is very aggressive. They punish municipalities that color outside the lines. And because their punishment of municipalities over the past 10 years has not stopped.
The library is now closed. We will reopen tomorrow at 10 a.m. Have a good night.
Has not stopped.
La biblioteca ya está cerrada. Abrimos de nuevo a las 10 de la mañana. Que tengan una buena noche.
Si se puede.
Those threats and intimidation haven't stopped municipalities from continuing to take on the oil and gas industry. Because of that, they've now gone after the lawyers. And so recently, I was sanctioned for $52,000 in a federal court in Pennsylvania by a judge who was hearing a case by a municipality who was trying to stop 151 million gallons of toxic wastewater from being dumped into their municipality. In addition to that, I've had a disciplinary complaint now filed against me by the same judge who is attempting to interfere with my license And so all to say, sometimes when I set foot on Indian reservations, because we're now representing several tribes on issues, I'm reminded of how insulated we are and how privileged we are in many ways, especially being on tribal land. And the fact of the matter is that we have to stop being so privileged, because fighting these fights means putting us in harm's way. The other way to look at it is that we're hitting the bullseye, because this stuff has become so potent and so dangerous that they have to come after the lawyers to try to chill the lawyers.
And the audience refrain, please, from commenting. We want to make sure we're respectful to everyone. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Is it on? The city has come up with proposed regulations and says they expect to be sued over them. If we're getting sued anyway, what's the difference between getting sued for regulating, like the city attorney anticipates, and getting sued for banning using the climate bill of rights law we already have in place? What is the difference in those lawsuits?
So the lawsuit would be less harsh. It would use some of the same legal claims as would be brought against a ban, but most likely it would be less harsh. And for the sole reason that the state authorizes municipalities to adopt regulations and zoning provisions and those types of things. So since you're authorized to do so, what the corporation is hauling you into court would be for exceeding those parameters of what you're authorized to do under the law. And so it's likely to be less harsh. But then again, I'm not sure we can draw those conclusions either, because the oil and gas industry has been so aggressive here. That's off the top of my head.
Thank you so much for being here. And we recognize that preventing oil and gas from fracking our town will likely be an ongoing fight. What combination of strategies should we consider pursuing to make sure we are able to beat them in both the short and the long term?
So short term means using some of the strategies and tactics, legal arguments that have been developed elsewhere, have evolved over time. I also think that because it's understandable to us that people are engaged in other forms of enforcement, like civil disobedience, for example. So in my hometown, people sat on the railroad tracks. And I sat back and said, it's understandable that people are doing that, because our local government was threatened with a lawsuit by BNSF, the railroad corporation, who said if you pass a law banning oil and gas transport by rail through the city, we're going to sue you. And the city council bailed. The city council said, oh, it's not within our power to do this, and we've been threatened with a lawsuit, so we're going to freak out and we're going to bail, and decide not to pass the ordinance. So the people in the city, what were they supposed to do? Just sit back and say, oh, trains come through the city. Well, they said we're not going to do that. And so a handful of them got on the tracks and stopped 11 trains, fossil fuel trains. And then charges were brought. Now there's a trial in April. And so I think because it's understandable that people need to engage in that kind of behavior, kind of actions, when all other remedies have been foreclosed, that I think it's understandable that municipalities become protective mechanisms for that action.
Yes.
So you take the action to defend or enforce the ordinance, but you also take action to protect the people in your municipality who feel the need, when other remedies are foreclosed, to take other action. That may include amending the criminal code to eliminate criminality for those types of activities. May also involve the municipality paying for legal defense for the folks that are arrested. We're not used to thinking in those terms, but may also mean that. But it comes down to how hard you want to fight, and whether you're willing to go the distance or not. Use all the tools in the toolbox, or try to just pick one out and run with it.
Okay, thank you.
So our council tells residents that we need regulations because a ban will be overturned, and then we will have nothing to protect our community. Is this typical? Is this a typical reaction of elected officials in other communities? And what happens to communities that follow this approach?
It's pretty typical. I think in many ways it's understandable, which is half of a but something half a bagel is better than no bagel or something like that. I don't know. That you know, it's tough. Is the answer. That the regulatory stuff is about validating. It's about saying, okay, we're going to accept our role of living on our knees, and we're going to validate this approach. We're going to validate the oil and gas extraction coming in. It legitimizes it, legalizes it, creates a framework for it, all those types of things. And it's important to understand the regulatory stuff can't be used to ban, except in very rare circumstances. It's not a ban. The regulations are not a ban. They're going to allow oil and gas in, it's just with certain rules. And so it's almost a question of which direction do you want to go? Do you feel the need to go? And it's not like, I use this line all the time, it's not like people wake up on a Sunday morning and say, hey, let's take on the oil and gas industry, just for kicks. It's because you have to at some point. You can't live without doing it. That's how people in these other communities that we represent have ended up in the place that they are. People like to blame us. Oh, it's CELDF doing this, CELDF. No, it's not. It's John Perry and Stacy Long in Grant Township, 2 elected officials, who stood up to the oil and gas industry and said, we don't care if we have to file for municipal bankruptcy, right? We will go that far because we understand that the damage in dumping frack wastewater into an injection well in our town is going to cost us more than actually seeking federal bankruptcy protection for municipalities.
Again, thank you for your enthusiasm, but we want to just get through all the questions. I'm going to ask one that is germane to this.
You take more time telling us to be quiet.
We can wait.
No, we
Okay,
can't.
but we did for
We
an
won't.
hour and 10 minutes.
We're not going to do that.
Action now.
Go ahead.
Do I have approval to continue? What is the cost reward of the probable lawsuit that would follow the city of Lafayette upholding the Climate Bill of Rights?
So we have to understand, I'm actually going to elevate that above Lafayette to just to speak generally about what happens. When these fights come in the door, it really separates out the real fighters from the folks that have talked a good game about fighting. Because when we counsel municipal officials, so when we're retained by a municipality, we engage in a lengthy counseling process. Most people have a 1-page retainer agreement with their lawyers. We have a 7-page, 8-page retainer agreement that tries to cover some of this ground. We also do it in person, which is to say, you have to assume the worst case scenario when you get into these fights. And the worst case scenario is you enforce the ordinance, or the oil and gas industry sues you over the ordinance or a similar ordinance. And the lawsuit that comes in the door, it's important to understand this. The most important thing about tonight, I think, is this, which is that when the corporation comes in the door to sue your municipality, they file a civil rights lawsuit. It always sounds strange to say that, but it's a civil rights lawsuit because the corporation has constitutional rights that they contend that you're violating with the ordinance. So it's styled as a civil rights lawsuit. As a civil rights lawsuit, the reason why they do it is because the law favors civil rights lawsuits. So as a person, because corporations claim status as a person under the relevant federal law that deals with civil rights actions, they bring it as a civil rights lawsuit. What that means is that they can sue you for damages. In this case or other cases dealing with oil and gas, it could be the cost of the unobtainable oil and gas resources that you've locked up from the oil and gas industry. So they'll sue you for that as damages. That can be substantial. In addition, as a civil rights lawsuit, it allows them to access another law which would force the municipality to pay the attorney's fees of the lawyers representing the oil and gas company in their lawsuit against the municipality. Okay? Those are the 2 main areas of financial risk that you put yourself in. And the final piece of that is that your insurance company generally runs for the hills. Because there are provisions within different insurance carrier contracts which allow the insurance company to uninsure your municipality if they attempt to defend, particularly, a law that the insurance company believes is unconstitutional or illegal. So you can expect no insurance coverage from your insurance carrier. In some places, that has meant the municipality suing the insurance carrier, which I favor, to force them to actually provide some of the promises that they made through all those expenses monthly, monthly in years of paying the fees to the insurance company. So the fact is that this is not easy. No, I don't think anybody wants to paint it as easy. And it is an uphill climb. But again, nobody does it by choice. You do it mostly because you have no place left to go. That's the only municipalities we represent, really, is the places that have no place left to go.
Mr. Lindsay, I'll ask you another constituent question that came in. CELDF stated in the response to the city that it would allow an audit by the city's insurance carrier if the carrier provides insurance coverage to the city for an enforcement or defense action based on the constitutional right of local community self-government. It's unlikely Lafayette's insurance carrier will do that, as you mentioned. Can CELDF refer the city to another insurance carrier anywhere in the world that would?
We've spent many hours doing that work for other municipalities. We have a couple insurance companies in Pennsylvania that have insured risky municipalities, but I wouldn't venture to guess who would cover here. But we're certainly willing to help out with that if folks want our participation.
Thomas, thanks for being here. As you know, this city council, with the exception of Mayor Lee here, has fought us for the last going on 6 years on a ban. They do not want us to ban fracking here. They're worried about their careers, much more than the health and safety of this community. And just back in 2013, they sided with COGO when our community bill of rights was overturned.
I remember.
Yeah, and so just recently, they passed a stripped-down version of the Climate Bill of Rights, which is essentially a ban on fracking, although I don't think they understand that. Thomas, you're the legal expert in this room. Can you explain to our community how the city can get away with neglecting to enforce this ban and instead work on regulating the terms of our poisoning in this community?
Yeah. So the council could choose tomorrow to repeal the Climate Bill of Rights. It's as a council adopted ordinance, they could choose tomorrow to repeal it. Generally, if a council, elected body, municipality, refuses to enforce an ordinance that clearly states that there's a non-discretionary duty, that's the legal language, about enforcing it, then the city could be sued. The municipality can be sued. We're actually preparing one of those lawsuits right now in Ohio, where a community has refused to enforce a community bill of rights and has instead done other things in violation of that bill of rights. So I think it's important to hold elected officials accountable in that respect. The pros and cons of moving forward with a defense of community bill of rights, getting involved in court, looking at damage award, all those things are things that need to be considered. And we can't put ourselves in the position of a decision maker or a resident of the community to decide, does it make sense to do this or not? We have strong feelings ourselves about which direction needs to go, because as long as we're regulating the harms, things are going to get worse. And from a climate change perspective, we have no time. There's zero time left. I mean, I was just at a presentation on climate change and knocked my socks off. That it's done, it's cooked. And right now we're just arguing over how bad it's going to get. So every day that we continue with the business as usual and nobody steps up to actually break the system, because it's fixed and it needs to be broken, that the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get. And again, I don't think there's any apologies we can make to the folks coming down the road in 50 years is going to make a difference, unless we take action to stop it now. In those municipalities that we've assisted, it's been the residents of the community.
So I have a question that's germane to that from a constituent. Court battles for civil rights, such as Brown versus Board of Education, were won by individuals willing to sue government entities. These individuals did not partner with government entities to sue other government entities. They brought the lawsuit themselves to defend their own fundamental rights. If climate rights are truly a fundamental right, why hasn't CELDF, on behalf of a local citizen and on its own nickel, brought suit against the state of Colorado on its own?
Well, we don't have a lot of nickels. We're pretty small. But sure, I mean, I think the door opens to all those things. But for municipalities to simply pass the buck, I mean, you pay taxes to your municipality. I mean, it's yours. Right, the municipality is yours. Yeah, and so I think to say, well, the burden should be on individual people to try to validate their rights. I mean, that has to happen too, but municipalities can't just step to the side and say, oh, okay, you're our residents and we actually take an oath to protect your health, safety, and welfare, but oops, we're not going to do that here. So I think that's
So I'm a lawyer also, as well as a political activist. You've made some reference to other great movements in history. There was a question about Brown versus Board of Education. We have in our history, we know, kind of there were great evils that were eventually ruled illegal. Have